Hao and Kalimera, as we say in Greece. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to talk about macroeconomic prospects in China and the global economy. Since preparing these slides, the referendum in Britain has taken place, and of course it's changed prospects in Europe in particular, but also more globally. So I added some slides on the UK referendum, what we call Brexit, the exit from the European Union. So I hope we can still manage to get everything within the 60 allocated minutes, and then look forward to having a discussion about it afterwards. So what I'm going to do is to start with very brief remarks about only 2 slides on the Chinese record up to now. It's probably very familiar to you, but I will put it into a context, and then talk about various aspects that I think are important in the next phase of Chinese economic development within the context of the global economy. Now, as we all know, China has had a tremendous record growth over the last 20 years. It has done a lot of catching up with the industrial and income-wise more advanced world, but there is still a long way to go. And you can see that here when we compare Chinese income per head of the population with the United States and Europe, you can see that China is about 20%. It's about 1/5 income in China is about 1/5, 20% of income in the European Union, and it's about 14% of income in the United States. Of course, this is the best measure that economists use for a standard of living. So if you see it in this context here, you will see that there is still a long way to go to catch up with the European Union and the United States. Japan, of course, is somewhere there as well. It's about the same level as the European Union. And now, when you compare it with the middle-income countries, then, which, by the way, now includes Greece, where we are today, especially after its financial crisis, then you can see that that China has caught up with the middle-income definition of the United Nations. It's very close to 100%, and given current growth performance, it will overtake the mean of the middle-income countries. You can see the phenomenal rise, how fast the relative Chinese line rises after the reforms of 1980. Now globally, again, to set it into context, the United States is now growing robustly. It's well ahead of where it was in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. It's growing at something like it's what we would expect the United States to grow between 2 and 3%. Now, there are concerns about the outcome of the presidential election. Always in presidential year, there are some uncertainties about the United States economy, but this year in particular, the uncertainties are even more because of the apparent success of the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, who's a completely unknown quantity to the European allies as well as globally as to what he will do. Some people get very scared. Even the Wall Street Journal had an article, and the Financial Times too had articles about being rather frightened by the prospect of the Trump presidency. Others are saying that this is all electioneering, and once he gets elected, then things will just become back to normal in the way that Ronald Reagan, for example, was running the United States. They have same kind of advisors as well. On the other hand, if Hillary Clinton wins, then there will be more of the same. There won't be so much uncertainty as to what she might do because the Clinton family have been in power sufficiently long. I'm not saying things will be bad or worse, although personally I think I'm a little bit frightened by Trump presidency, but when we're talking about about the economy, uncertainty is not a good thing, and in that sense there are some concerns about the US. Japan is back to normal, very slow growth rate, but when we talk to Japanese economists, what they're saying is that they're focusing on the quality of development rather than faster rates of growth, which once you reach the standard of living of Japan, then that might be a good thing after all. Now Europe is the big worry again, unfortunately, being a European, and it has been a big concern since 2008. And where it looked like it was coming out of recession, then suddenly we had the Brexit vote, and we had some other extreme parties emerging in Europe, and also we've had the terrorism that is from Islamic State that is happening all the time. So in that sense, there are many concerns about Europe, and every European should be concerned. And what we're really lacking in Europe now, I think, is very inspirational leadership that will guide the continent onto a next phase, like the great Europeans we had in the 1990s. People like Jacques Delors and Helmut Schmidt and Giscard d'Estaing, they don't exist anymore in Europe. They're more like country leaders rather than European leaders, and that is a concern. Given the process of unification that Europe has started, it does need to have inspirational leadership to see through the current troubled times. So there are concerns that even the whole of the European Union might break up. We can talk about that later. Now, given that the European Union is the main concern, let's talk a little bit more about Brexit. Now, in my view, and in the view of many of the commentators I've read, the vote of the British public to exit the European Union, it just cannot be explained on economic grounds. It can be explained partly by the rhetoric of those of a section of the political elite, which is more nationalistic, more right-wing, more anti-immigration. And it caught the imagination of those factions of the population that they were not doing well. And partly there's a tendency in Europe which the British government hasn't appreciated, which is basically anti-European. Whenever a country in Europe has a vote that concerns the European Union, the public votes as a protest. They take the European Union and the institutions that are based in Brussels as being the kind of elite, the establishment, and they rebel from their own country. It's happened in Greece repeatedly. It happened in the Netherlands with the European Constitution. It happened in France, and it's happening in Britain as well. It's not up to the economists to explain, because it's not driven by economics, but there is a tendency in Europe, when there is a national vote about the whole of the European Union, for people to vote against it, to vote against the European Union. And that's what explains to a large extent why so many people in Britain were voting. And in fact, it's what the Brexit, those who supported Brexit, in particular the current Foreign Secretary of Britain, Boris Johnson, and the head of the right-wing nationalistic party, Nigel Farage, what they exploited is precisely this fact, and that's why their motto during the campaign was "Let's get back control," meaning let's get back control of policy from Brussels, from the European Union. But that is completely unjustified. How do you get back control? You do have control. You decided to sign treaties. So essentially what they're saying is, let's tear up the treaties that we have with the European Union. But those are going to have serious economic problems. There is going to be a very difficult transition because for the last 40 years the British economy has been adapting to European Union membership. Most of the trade of Britain is with the European Union. 45% of UK exports are to the European Union, and 55% of imports come from Europe, especially from German manufacturing. Britain has a financial sector which serves the whole of Europe. It doesn't have much of a manufacturing industry because it consumes mainly German manufacturing goods. And all that will need to change, and these negotiations will take 2 to 5 years. The last time Britain had doubts about the European Union, and there was intense negotiation, was when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and she wanted to negotiate a new level of contributions from Britain to the European funds. She got her way in the end, but negotiations lasted for 4 years, and they're still talking about them in Europe. And that was a negotiation about just one aspect: how much should Britain contribute to European Union funds. Now negotiation is about the entire economy. So you would expect it to take no more than 4 years. Some people are saying uncertainty will last for the next 10 years. In fact, the Treasury in Britain, when it was making calculations on the impact of Brexit on the British economy, was working on a 10-year horizon. So what happens when you have uncertainty that lasts for 10 years? Well, the investment is the first thing that suffers, and investment is what Britain needs. I don't think public finances will get worse. The value of the pound will be very volatile. So if you're really smart in foreign exchanges, you can make a lot of money. If you are just smart but not really smart, you can lose a lot of money, because I don't think anyone can understand foreign exchanges. I certainly feel the way the pound goes up and down, and the way it will continue going up and down now. Europe itself will need to adjust. If you see European economic performance generally, and British performance in particular, what's happened since 2010, when the recession suffered, was that productivity suffered. The worst productivity performer in Europe was Italy. It's been the case since 1990. In 2010, Britain joined it. It has one of the worst productivity growth performances in the OECD. And now this will get worse, because there will be no investment, there will be no new technology very much. The foreign direct investment into Britain is technologically more advanced, but that's going to suffer. Why should foreign companies come and locate in Britain when they don't know what the outcome will be? Of course, I saw that part of the theme of this session was trade between Europe and China. Well, the European Union is China's biggest trading partner, if we go together. It's a single market of 500 million people. Of course, that's about half, in fact, it's less than half the size of China, but because of the different levels of income and spending, there's a lot more spending and consumption and investment in Europe. And obviously the UK wants to retain access to it. There's been a lot of efforts by the former Chancellor of the Exchequer to progress further trade relations between China and the United Kingdom. But now it's going to be a problem, because you don't really know under what terms you'll be trading with the UK anymore. You do know under what terms you're trading with the European Union, because there's a European Union law and treaties and establishments, but something new will govern trade relations with Britain in the future. And there's going to be something very interesting that political observers will be following, which is that the European Commission will want to be very tough on Britain, because it doesn't want to encourage others to vote to leave. See, Britain gets a very easy deal outside, then Greece will say, why should we put up with this policy they're imposing on us? Let's vote to leave as well, and we'll get an easy new arrangement. The Netherlands are complaining, and Finland are complaining, because they are contributing money into the European funds. And now there is an association between the money that countries give to European funds and the money that the countries of the south, Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Cyprus to some extent, are taking from the European funds. So now, instead of some Dutch politicians just saying we're contributing to a common European effort, what they're saying is that we're giving money to the Greeks to go and spend it. So if Britain gets an easy deal outside Europe, then they're going to follow. So the European Commission will want to be very tough in negotiations. On the other hand, since Britain has 55% of its imports come from Europe, and especially big manufacturing companies in Germany, they are not going to be bold. They are not going to be tough. They will not want to be tough. Why should the French wine producer be tough on Britain? It's the biggest European market for wine, for French wines, is Britain. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, market for German cars is Britain. Why should they want to be tough to the British if they want to sell to them? So there's going to be a conflict between the European Commission and European big business. And of course we don't know who's going to win. It's something to follow. From China's point of view, of course, you want the European business to win, so that you have the same trading arrangements with Britain after Brexit as you had before, but I don't think the European Commission will agree very much. Now, what's Britain going to get? Well, there are three options that are being floated. The first option is that it retains full access to the single market, which is something that Norway has, which is outside the European Union, and it's known as the European Economic Area. But in order to do that, Britain will have to allow freedom of movement of labour, and it will also keep the current level of contributions. And they're objecting to both those things. So what Britain is saying they want, their preferred outcome, is something like this option one. They call it minus. They say, we want EEA minus. EEA is the European Economic Area, but with something less. And something less they want is no freedom of movement of labour. But now, of course, they haven't applied formally, so there is no formal response from Europe. But there are informal comments from leading Europeans saying they are not going to accept this. Most recently from a very senior French politician who said this is pie in the sky for Britain if they think they can get away with EEA minus. So I think we have to forget the Norway option. The second one is free trade, which is something that Canada has with the European Union. This is the case where you have free trade, but anything beyond free trade is decided at the national level. And I think it's the most likely outcome, in fact, that we're going to see. It's going to take very long to negotiate, but I think that's where we're going to be. It's going to cost Britain something like 2 or 3% of its GDP, but it will be able to continue trading. And the final one is if negotiations break down, then Britain, of course, is a member of the World Trade Organization. So relations between Britain and the European Union would be the same as relations between China and the European Union currently. It's unlikely that they will break down to that extent, but the UK Treasury has calculated that if that is the final outcome, it will cost the UK 6% of its GDP by 2025. But as I was saying, we'll get there when politicians just argue with each other until there is breakdown of negotiation. Now, the implication is that for Europe as a whole and the Eurozone is that we're going to have a lot of uncertainty. Currently, as I'm sure you know, there are negotiations about two very big trading agreements between the United States and the rest of the world. One is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is taking place between the United States and Europe, and the other is the Pacific negotiations between the United States and most of the countries of the Pacific Rim, excluding China, of course, as I'm sure you know. And the question again is what's going to happen to the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership if it's not going to involve Britain. Now, of course, both presidential candidates spoke against both these agreements. They are mainly agreements that were pushed by, not agreements, negotiations. They are mainly negotiations that were being pushed by the Obama administration. I doubt whether a Clinton administration will scrap them. After all, they're all Democrats. But as I was saying before, what Trump is going to do both in the Pacific and the Atlantic is anyone's guess. He spoke so strongly against it that it wouldn't surprise me if he were to scrap them. But then he also spoke very strongly against the European Union. I doubt whether he would want to break up the European Union, but he did say that it would be a good thing for Europe if it breaks up, which is not a good start to your biggest allies. Europe become president, but anyway, that's a different story. With respect to the location of business, currently most foreign direct investment into Europe goes to Britain because they have a good legal system, British law, they don't have much red tape, they have a flexible labor market, they attract a lot of foreign investment. You know, for example, I think most, but if not most, certainly many Japanese cars exported to Europe are produced in Britain. Something like 90% of the British car industry is owned by foreign companies, and half of that is exported to Europe. It's a way that the Japanese found to bypass any European restriction on the number of Japanese cars that can be imported into Europe. Now, if Britain were to leave, they're going to lose that facility. So obviously they want to move away. They want to move into Europe, into European country. And a lot of this kind of institutions, especially in the financial sector, are now considering locating elsewhere. You see, like, you're a company that might be considering something like this, but if, say, you want to make an investment, you want to establish some business in Europe, Britain will not be an attractive. It's not an attractive place with Brexit, just because you don't know what's going to be the outcome 10 years from now. You go and locate in France, Spain, you know that you're going to be in Europe, in the European Union. So that, in that sense, the British economy is going to suffer from this vote. And then there are the political issues that might even lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom, because Northern Ireland voted to stay in, Scotland voted to stay in, London voted to stay in, the rest of England voted to stay out. There are deep social divisions emerging that might give rise to borders between Britain and Ireland that never existed, borders between Scotland and Britain having existed for 400 years now. So that's another main concern. So probably talking too much, but given that I live in Britain and it's such a hot issue, I would like to say that. Let's now move on to someone didn't switch on the countdown when we watch the rules that when I leave the time to talk now. There's something that is supposed to warn me when I'm running out of time. Okay, now let me repeat again what I said. You see how the Western world, if you like, is looking at China currently, and especially Europe, and China and the other Asia, Southeast Asia, in fact, is the only hope for global economic growth for the European community. The US were worried about the elections. Japan has taken a different route. Brexit and the EU are having uncertainties. So if you look at the global economy as a whole, then China and Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, are the countries that the world economy, the global economy is looking at for leadership in economic growth in the next few years. But if you look at China, though, and given the concerns that have been raised about economic growth, there is some work that needs to be done not to allow it to drag down. As I was saying before, I don't think many of those are not justified, but there is no doubt that the country should restructure all the time as it's moving from one phase of economic development to another. Now, referring to phases of economic development, you can see those taking place in China, and you can see where the need for restructuring lies. Because if you look at the stages of economic development of the countries that are more advanced on that path, then you will see that the economic development always begins with improvements in agriculture, is the agrarian revolution or the green revolution. That happened in China in the 1980s. That's followed by industrialization and urbanization. and that's happened in China in the 90s and 2000s when growth of manufacturing took place. Now, usually, after that, there is a stage of financial development, debt management, banking regulation, because industry becomes more advanced and sophisticated and needs to be by a good financial system, it is going to be further on. That hasn't taken place in China, and that's a sector of the economy that does need to be modernized and brought up to date, made more transparent. And then, after that, you have the new technology, currently with the digital technology, with automation, the Internet of Things, as it's called now in English. And China is moving in that direction. I think it's moving successfully with the Made in China 2025 initiative that was announced a couple of years ago. And also to some extent by the One Belt, One Road initiative, which opens up more technologically advanced trade relations. Now that stage of new technology adoption should lead to the fall in the number of jobs in manufacturing, the industrial sector as a whole, and to the rise of the service sector as the main employer of the population. And we are seeing that taking place in China. I'm going to show you this graph that shows that. Now, what should the policy priorities be? Well, the policy priorities should be to enhance productivity growth. That's essential. And there's a little bit of contradiction here in the policies being pursued. Because on the one hand, the Made in China 2025 and One Belt, One Road will improve productivity growth. But on the other hand, there are still restrictions on the financial dimension, but also on migration, that are holding productivity back, and those need to be resolved. Okay, so now if you look at the next, say, 2 to 3 years in China, what are the positives and what are the negatives? Beginning with the negatives, there is certainly about the financial sector that we can certainly about the R&D, its internationalization, its value productivity. Capital is still leaving the country, which is unknown why. The debt is surprisingly high, given that the country has had surpluses in its balance of payments, it's had that fast rate of economic growth, and the slowdown that we observed in economic growth recently, but as I was saying, 6% is the rate of growth rate, especially in imagination. The positives are that there are good prospects in industrial trade because of good policy initiatives I mentioned. There is rebalancing taking place between investment and consumption in the way that it has taken place in Europe and the United States. And the negatives can be addressed by policy. There aren't any major weaknesses that you can say there's nothing policy can do. So in a way, if policy could be directed on that and change fairly quickly. Now, labor productivity improving, the improvement, so far, the biggest source of productivity improvement in China has been the movement from agriculture to the cities to manufacturing. Agricultural productivity is extremely low. Labor productivity, that is how much each person employed produces, is much higher in urban environments. So by moving the population from rural areas to urban areas, you're increasing productivity fast. And that's been the main source of productivity improvements. But overall, it's still very, very low compared with the international standards. Again, here, the blue line is the European productivity relative to the American one, which has the United States economy is the most productive economy in the world. And the red line is Chinese productivity related to American. And you can see that Europe is about 70% of the United States in terms of productivity. China is only just over 10%, I think it's about 12%. So there's a long way to go to improve productivity. And improving productivity here, there's something could still come from urbanization, but most of it will have to come from new technology. You do need to have new technology, and when getting new technology, you need to have good financial backing for new investments. Now, I'm going to show you later on that there is still a substantial part of the population in China, the working population, working in agriculture. You can see that agricultural productivity is only about 25% of industrial. The number here is how much a worker produces, a Chinese worker produces in non-agriculture, that's industrial services, relative to how much he or she can produce in agriculture, and what Chinese workers can produce in urban environments, city or so industrial services, about 4 times as much as in agriculture. So if you move a worker from urban employment if you move a worker from rural employment to urban employment, you are adding to productivity by a factor of 3 for that work alone, which is substantial. The future here then is how can we get more urbanization without causing the usual problems of urbanization, congestion or over-employment, so you lose the prospects in manufacturing, but that reallocation is the case. This is the figure that I referred to before. Again, you can see the share of agricultural employment in the Chinese economy is still about 20%, and compare that with the United States, which is only 2%. So only 2% of American workers are employed in agriculture, and they're producing more food than they need. They're exporting food, despite the vast consumption of food that takes place in America, which is obesity is a problem, for example.